Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Dan. So you don't have to check your phones. The Patriots are down 7-3. So I just want to make sure we cover that. And perhaps we'll give you an update halfway through. I am Kurt Sundstrom. I'm one of the curators here at the Currier, and I'm grateful that you've all come out to hear this. Dan and I have been having a conversation like we're going to have now for a long time. And I first met Dan 25 years ago, and I've always been amazed by his work, but I've never been more amazed than when I saw it all installed. It's absolutely gorgeous. So I thought for our conversation we would do a little bio, and then we'll just let Dan. So Dan, you grew up in a family, your parents were pretty creative. How was that, growing up in a creative family?
I have good memories of, as a kid, having creative activity around me. My dad was a designer for RCA in Philadelphia, in Camden, New Jersey, and in Philadelphia. And he designed some of the first televisions that RCA made. There would be an unfinished design, meaning the guts of the TV would be there in the living room, and I could watch Willie the Worm on a screen like that out there, but just the tubes and the guts of the TV on a stand. And then he'd have a cabinet underway, and instead of being Chippendale, it would be his idea of modern. So it'd be mint green with slanty legs, and it was just this thing. It was normal in the house. And my mom, and he also did terrific renderings, in old style with, airbrush. And so my mom did illustrations for the Philadelphia department stores advertising of women's dresses. So she would draw and watercolor full-page ads for the Inquirer or the Bulletin, for Wanamaker's and Gimbels and Lit Brothers and Strawbridge's, and it was normal. So her pages of women and men would appear full page, in the newspaper on the weekend, and I could see them on the drawing board in her, in her workroom as part of the apartment that we lived in, and that's an early vision. And I could describe it further, but basically, I grew up in an environment like that.
And in the 60s, you went to San Francisco. Did that have any impression or influence on your work?
I would say that influenced me in other ways, but not so much.
You can't remember, I guess. No,
it was a kind of turbulent time in my life at the moment, because I just was finishing Philadelphia College of Art, which was terrific for 4 years. And then I was splitting up with my first wife, and I moved to San Francisco and immediately joined a commune and got into the whole hippie scene and lived in Haight-Ashbury. It was such a scene of, rip-offs and just shysters, and just, it was nasty, and the drug scene was clearly not for me. I can't smoke, and I've had a cough all my life, and I'm not a smoker, and it just wasn't for me. So I put an ad in the Chronicle and started up my carpentry business again, and I had that in Philadelphia to pay my bills in college, and so I was doing all right, but I knew that it wasn't. I wanted to go back to school and really focus and create something. Because as an undergrad, I tried so many things. It was like a smorgasbord of process, and I was a combination ceramics major with a minor in filmmaking, and I did all the assignments for all the major assignments in jewelry. And I also did illustrating, and I was the illustrator for the college newspaper. So I had my fingers in a lot of things and never settled down. And at Rhode Island School of Design, where I went to graduate school, I was Chihuli's first graduate student, so I just did glass. And I did a little bit of illustration a couple of times with the illustration department there, but I never really used that place for its resources, which I regret. But I think what I did in San Francisco, besides the culture that I witnessed and the kind of the scene, I think really I wasn't experiencing that city for what its history and its resources offered. I was experiencing it for the social aspect of all these people who had moved there like me, who were kind of lost souls. And that to me was a scene I wanted to leave.
And then when you got back to school and you're working with Julie, what was it that drew you to glass? And we have a big hunk of glass. I don't know how this ended up here, but you can explain what this is and also what drew you to glass. There were very few glass artists working at the time, or artists working in glass.
Yeah, that's true. With this, you could say, I'll get all my answers from this crystal block, which isn't a crystal ball. This is something out of a trash heap at Waterford Crystal. And they had a giant heap of glass. It's common in a glass factory for glass to be molten in massive amounts, tons, in a giant pot. So a big pot like this, and 3 feet, 4 feet diameter, would hold a couple tons of this lead crystal glass. And that's where they would get molten glass out of the furnace and do various things with it, blowing among them. And at some point, the pot starts to crack. They just do. It's a refractory pot. And so they take it with a forklift while the glass is still molten out of the furnace and take it outside of the factory building and dump it in a pile. And these giant blobs of glass are there, and they split apart because they're not annealed or anything. There's cooling and outdoor temperature. And eventually there'd be big chunks of this stuff lying around. So when I was working there, I worked there 3 times over a few years, and I asked them, can I just send home some chunks of crystal? So there it is. It's a souvenir. It's sharp and it's really heavy, so you got to wear gloves to carry it. But what'd you ask me about?
There were very few glass artists working glass at the time, and I'm really curious what drew you to the medium itself. And also, you always would correct me or whatever that you were a sculptor working in glass, or you're an artist working in glass. So what is that?
When I was a student at Philadelphia College of Art, the college was offered a grant of $5,000 from the Fostoria Glass Company in West Virginia to build a glass studio for the industrial design department. And I'm not sure what the connections were there, but I think an alum went back to, that part of to Ohio nearby, or to that part of West Virginia to be involved, and they just wanted to tap the minds of a lot of the designers that were students at the time. So I was asked to assist an instructor in building the glass studio, probably because I had my carpentry business and I was doing a lot of work in Philadelphia of various kinds to fix decks or busted down doors from burglars and all kinds of things. But I built the shop, and then we got to use this shop, but there were no teachers. Nobody was there to teach us how to make a perfect Italian goblet or something. So what we did was just experiment with the raw material, and I would go to the library and get a book and look at vase forms, for example, and try to imitate that form and make a Etruscan vase, make a Swedish modern vase. And it was really slop and slump. We did not have the control or anything like that, but I got intrigued by the material. And then when I went to graduate school, I just decided, what the hell, I'm going to just work with glass. And Dale was starting up the glass program at RISD, so it was a good fit, and I went there. And as I worked with it more and more, I became interested in way more than just glass blowing. And I remember going to a glass shop to get some industrial glass to work with, and I saw some colored glass around the back of the shop. And I asked the guy about it, and he said, "Oh, that's vitrolite." The vitrolite is an industrial glass that was produced to make the front of a Woolworth store red, or to make a diner pail cream color with maroon trim or something, or make a bathroom wall or a kitchen wall. So I got interested in it, bought a bunch from the guy, and started playing with it. And then more and more ways of working with the material and so on interested me, and I just expanded from there. So I never wanted to be a glass blower making perfect vases or any of that stuff. I liked the potential of the material. And then there's so many processes with glass, from obviously blowing to casting to cold work. Like you could take that, if you annealed it, ran through a program to make it up and down and relieve the stress through an annealing cycle. You could then cut that up and start working with it and carve it into a shape that you want. And I got into many industrial processes. Probably one of the longest ones that I worked with several factories in West Virginia and in France and in Italy. So gradually I let industrial process and industrial relationships influence the way I think, the way I can imagine addressing a project. So, for example, casting 1,000 glass blocks that are this big and 2 inches thick, it's tons and tons of glass, and it costs a lot of money. And then you have handling and shipping and so on to deal with it, and then finally installation and so on. So getting into these processes involved learning a lot of things that I hadn't quite imagined at the time. I just liked the way these objects I could interpret my drawings through these kind of processes. So I built a lot of familiarity with the material and process, and also relationships with factories a lot of times.
And you mentioned drawing, and we know that everything starts with a drawing. Could you talk a little bit more about process and how drawing, it starts like this and then it ends like that?
Well, that wouldn't be the first drawing for that piece. It's not the final drawing, but when I just think freely, I use my sketchbooks to record my thoughts. And quite often, there would be, for something like this, maybe 2-3 pages in a sketchbook of figures in poses, just different attitudes. And then some linear elements that would be, and later on, become these kind of stalks and plants that are in this pseudo-environment that's created in that lamp. So I think through the drawing process, and I have records of these thoughts, and I have piles and piles of sketchbooks with all these things going way back, going into the 70s. And to go from the initial sketch to the drawing that I use to interpret the piece, to make the piece, there could be another dozen drawings that get more and more refined, and also top view, side view, like an orthographic drawing. And also drawings that would be used as templates to trace onto metal, to cut it out on a bandsaw, for example, or to, a template of the form that I wanted to blow in the hot shop, and then it, work that way. And then, so drawing is involved throughout the making of a particular object.
And also you involve a lot of experts in glass blowing and fabrication. How does that influence or how do you maintain your own creativity and creative output?
Well, I learned to collaborate in a certain way by stepping away, because if I get too close and say, well, hold it this way, hold it that way, that doesn't work. You got to give somebody their freedom. So in the hot shop, I'm particularly talking about right there, I never wanted to own a glass blowing studio. And even though I taught glass blowing in the beginning, and I can do it physically, it's never something I wanted to develop the skill and have that be who I am. So I see the relationships that I have there's a guy named Richard Royal in Seattle who's a longtime friend and really ace glassblower, and he has been sort of the lead man on a team of people, and it could involve men and women, of 6 or 7 people to make my work with me. So I put a drawing on the wall, and then I jump in and participate and work on certain aspects of the piece while it's hot and moving. And at the same time, he's in control of the whole thing and sees the big picture and makes sure that it's at the right place, in the right movement at the right time, because if it's out too long, it'll crack, etc. There are a lot of aspects to making something in the hot shop where you have brief moments of the material at a point where you can manipulate it, and the rest of the time you're heating, cooling, letting it fall to form it. And then finally, I work over a period of time also in a very concentrated way. So the place where I worked for years, for more than 40 years in Seattle, at Ben Moore's studio, Ben and Deborah Moore, on King Street, that was a very productive routine for me. I would go to Seattle, stay in their house, stay in Ben and Deborah's house for a week, and just get up every day and be in the shop at 6 and work, and then everybody go home at 3:30 or so, and I'd stay in the shop and draw, and then get up the next day and do it again. So I found it to be a good, productive routine. I didn't want to own the glassblowing process, think about the furnaces, maintenance, all the other stuff that comes, responsibilities, and just I let go of that. And same thing with the factories. I don't want to own a factory that has the capacity to cast 2,000 pounds of glass for me to make my piece for the Rainbow Room in Rockefeller Center. I wanted to have the factory in West Virginia make those parts with my molds. And so I set up all these relationships.
And when I started studying your work, I found the seeds of influences sprinkled throughout that I never would have recognized immediately. And you had mentioned Liechtenstein and Greek and Roman art. Can you talk to us a little bit about how those things, going to museums, going to archaeological sites, going to different countries, have influenced your work?
I think, I have a hard time restricting myself from trying something. And there's really no reason to. I mean, there are no rules in art. You can do whatever you want. So I've always felt that the museum is an amazing intellectual resource for me.
And even thinking about history, like you can't study history without understanding the art of a culture, for example. And to me, the messages that are sent, the evidence of things being important in a society, all that stuff is there in the art. And when I have time, in the Louvre or in the Met, or pick, another dozen favorite museums around the world, I really, like when I go to the Met and look at the attic vases, I still kind of get a charge out of those amazing big amphoras. They're just incredible pieces to me, the terracotta ones with the drawing on them.
And like this one here, we have this really fascinating animal head series that you did.
This is intriguing to me because I never thought about that, but you did. And that's because, but you're the expert in these kind of things. And, you're a Baroque and Renaissance scholar. So you're thinking that your approach is completely a different perspective, and yet somehow we end up in the same place.
Yeah.
But for me, this alligator was one of multiple heads that I made in an animal vase series. And the animal vases, I wanted to be evidently a vase. That's what the yellow rim is about. I mean, that says to me that it's, not just a straight up sculpture. And it's also not like taxidermy. These things are standing on their noses. So I'm not making a realistic thing. It's the zebra with his bloodshot eyes and so on. It's a vessel form, but it's not. It's a vessel that's been taken over sculpturally. So I saw it as an interesting format and developed it that way.
I love the camel. I mean, where does this come from? I mean, this is the one thing that's fascinating me.
I can't
When you
really
see
make
all
an
this
excuse
thing, and
for
the
that.
variety is just outrageous. And there's so many series, and they're so different. They're all so compelling. This pink camel is just, I love it. And the gorilla, we put him in a really prominent place in the exhibition because he welcomes people to your show. So what is it? What is it about? Where does this all come from?
Well, I mean, when you look at it's a sentient being looking at you. One time we were in San Diego, going to that zoo, fabulous outdoor zoo, and we paid a guy to take us around in a golf cart who was a ranger, I think. I've forgotten what his title was. But toward the end of this tour, we pulled up outside this big cement wall, which had big, thick iron bars on little tiny square windows, and there was a rhino in there. And the rhino came over and stuck his horn out. I started petting his horn and looking at him, and his one rhino eyeball was right there looking at me. And I was like looking into this animal's mind in a way. I mean, so I find that there's something about the character of even a bird, or there's something that looks at you and, takes you in their way, and you'll never know what that is. But it's intriguing nonetheless, and I think some of that came out in making this series of animals.
I think they're just fantastic. I absolutely love the work. And one of the other series I like is the bust that you made of the individuals. And again, I made up a lot of blah, blah, blah in the essay on this stuff that I guess you didn't know about. But you're still, it's an approach to not a portrait of a person or an individual, but it's an emotion or a feeling. Where did that come from? I mean, I can find it in the history of art that it's been done before, but what's
one of the busts that really got me going was it's in the National Gallery in D.C., and it's a bust of I think Lorenzo de Medici, and it's terracotta. It's a good-sized bust, and it's a bust. It's standing there. It's prominent. It's got this kind of presence that's not quite like, you know how Abraham Lincoln in his chair in the Lincoln Monument is there, and he's upright, and he's presidential somehow because of the way the sculptor interpreted his body and his head position and so on. And it's the same with that de Medici, but I was thinking that the bust doesn't have to do that. And there's one in the gallery now called Perspective, where the guy's on his head.
Right
Yeah,
here.
that one. Yeah, and so that's like, he's not contemplating his navel, he's just inward looking. And maybe self-absorbed, who knows? But
that's how I felt when we were putting it. I was so scared when we were putting up the show that we would never pull it off. My head was on my desk like that quite a bit during the day. So to me, it was more freaked out than anything.
But I find that I got a lot of freedom from the restrictions that I put on myself to make a bust and to make something that conveys a feeling, an emotion, a thought, through the gesture. And it's a simple gesture because I put arms on a couple of them. I put forearms on a few like this, but I didn't want it to be ultra realistic. That's not my way. I like it to be sketchy like this, and use certain aspects of the glass to make it otherworldly, you could say. I mean, like the righteous character with his thumb up, or her with her hand out like that. The hand gestures are obvious. You understand it. You feel it. At the same time, it's obviously glass. It's clearly a sculpture. It is not intended to be realistic.
But it still has a universal thing because it is widely recognizable. And the artists in the Renaissance would talk about capturing the motions of emotion, and that's the motions of the body, the hands, or capturing the movement of the soul in the body. And I think you've done that in an extremely unique way, in that the figures aren't done realistically, but you still understand what they're expressing. And I like the righteous guy. He's got a thumbs up, but he's also sticking his tongue out at someone. And I think it's just...
Yeah, I don't think of him necessarily as sticking his tongue out to be insulting or yeah kind of. It's more like he doesn't get the way his face is looking because he's so wrapped up in what he's saying. So
Yeah. And also just talk about a little bit how you add, so on his face, you have color, so his cheeks are almost red and hers are almost blushing. How does color also project that emotion of emotion?
I think it does, yeah. And, you could say, well, it's a little bit like 5 o'clock shadow, except it's not. And then, it's spread up under his eyes and so on. But that's the way I like glass. One of the reasons I like glass is because of its color. And it has endless range of color, and it also color that's very alive, especially in light. And it's unlike any other medium in that respect. There's nothing that has the range of color that glass does, no matter what it is. And I work with watercolor and pastels and so on. I've used a lot of different forms of color to capture a thought, but I find glass to be the most potentially expressive and alive. And so by blending color in the bubble at a very early stage, when the bubble's only that big, I'm applying most of the color that creates the streaking and blending on the bubble eventually. And when the bubble gets this big, that color is all stretched out and very thin, and overlapping colors then become more evident where one stops and one starts. And also, you can even see sort of how they're distinctly this color, and the third color, or 4 and 5. I mean,
And one thing that I found really interesting about this series of work is that you had mentioned earlier that you were an illustrator and the influence of cartoons or comic book illustration. And once you said that, I saw that in the figures. There was very simplicity of rendering. It was down to the most minimal characteristics that projected that emotion or that feeling that you were trying to create. And you talked about Liechtenstein, and I found this comparison really fascinating, that you're doing something similar. Can you talk about what you got from Liechtenstein or people that were influenced by
Liechtenstein or even Wesselmann, certain painters of the 60s interested me greatly just because of their boldness in taking something from pop culture, something from the comic strip of the newspaper into the world of fine art in their imagination, but then making it 8 feet by 8 feet, and doing it to take, like he did, the Ben-Day dots, which are in the newspaper, and once in a while you'd see a poorly printed page and you could really see the dot patterns because the way the printing machines work. But in his paintings, he emphasized it, put the dots there to be seen as the mechanics of color. And so I like the kind of stylization that occurs in line drawing that way, and even in characterizing because he had almost a standard lingo for a female face, a male face, a hand, this and that. And so I kind of like the language, the visual language that he developed because of that. And so it's quite evident it's his work. A lot of primary color throughout. And all those things attracted me.
And I think it's the same with your work. There are very few artists, but if I could see your work anywhere, it's immediately identifiable. You've created your own visual language that I find very compelling. And also just your penmanship and your draftsmanship are all immediately identifiable. Was that intentional? Or or did you set off to find your own voice? Was it immediate?
No, I mean, that to me it's not exactly a thought out thing. It's just, I think everybody's, like when you read a handwritten letter from someone, I suppose you could find some that are quite familiar depending on how they learned penmanship or script, how to write script or something like that. I don't know what caused me to write or draw the way I do stylistically.
It's very unique.
It evolved.
Yeah. And you also mentioned Caravaggio. This is the one painting that we've talked about.
Yeah, that's about my favorite Caravaggio. It's the only one of all of Caravaggios that I know. And Linda and I have traveled to see Caravaggios, like, in different museums in Italy and different places, like in Malta and so on. But never been to Fort Worth at the Kimball to see this piece. It's still, as an image, about one of my favorite things. I like the whole scene of it. I like the details that portray the characters and tell you something about who these people are. And the rich young guy that's being duped, has fine, very fine clothing, and the other guys have tattered clothing, and it just goes on, detail-wise. So there's something about that. His skill at setting up a scene is a very convincing scene. It's beautifully handled. His ability to render, to me, is astonishing. And the quality of light, and you could go on. It's just, I like Caravaggio's work, and even like a Jesus on the Cross, or anything from him has always been, or the beheading of St. John in Malta. That's an outrageous image. The only one he signed is in the blood, big signature. It's just, I don't know. There's something about Caravaggio that compelled me.
I mean, from what I see in Italian art, Italians always use their hands and their arms and their body to talk. And I think this is why Leonardo was so good at capturing the emotions of movement. And that's what I see you getting too. I mean, look how important the hands are in this Caravaggio, and in your bust figures too. Hands and the hand gesture is so important. But the other thing I like is that, and I would ask you to talk about this, what is the importance? I mean, natural light and the light coming through to illuminate is a secondary color or whatever in your work. How do you consider how natural light is going to illuminate your work in the process when you're making it? You can see with that wall opened up and that window and all those pieces behind it, they almost glow.
Right.
Do you anticipate what it's going to be like if an object is getting hit by a lot of natural light and how it's going to fit?
I do, yeah. And I think about the thickness. I think about the color overlays. I think about the form, the way it bends the light or traps the light, it glows. That's one of the reasons that I acid polish 90% of more than 90% of what I make. I've done that for years and years. I can't remember when I started, but it was in France in the 70s. When I first worked with the acid. And the non-reflective surface allows the object to glow. And when it's shiny, it, to me, is calling attention to the surface quite a lot, and even creating reflections, which I find, in a way, for me, distracting from what I'm trying to convey with the work. So I like putting that acid polish surface on the piece, sandblasting and acid polishing,
And these,
to make them glow.
and so the acid polish gives it sort of a matte finish.
It's a semi-gloss matte. Yeah, it depends how long what your formula is, how long you leave it in there, and all that. Yeah.
And so what I really love these two pieces, that the metal work on it is extraordinary. And one thing I've come to learn about you and your process of working is it's absolutely, everything has to be absolutely perfect. Does that drive your people nuts?
Yeah, I've only hired them if they're nutty. I think I've been damn lucky to have, for a long, long time, very dedicated, excellent help from a lot of people who have come to my studio to work with me and just put their heart into it and did a really good job. And it could be in metalsmithing, it could be in applying the decorative enamels to a vase form, it could be making the molds to cast the glass parts for the aquamotion fish heads and torsos, or this is a piece called Tug of Dogs. The dog torsos, the strange horn on the dog head, and the little eyeballs that are set in, they're all made out of glass parts. And it's tedious work. It's down to the details. You got to get it just right, and it's fussy. And so my obsession, so I'm just saying, I have to hand it to, I can't take credit for doing that myself. I have a very good, long list of people who have helped me in many, many ways in all different capacities.
So like with these here, those dots are all applied individually.
But that piece on the right, I'll bet it took a month at least to put all the dots of enamel on there. And then it goes in the kiln and gets fired, and you hope it doesn't break. And then it's finally done. But that piece went, the blue piece there, both of them, they went through, they're good-sized pieces. And they both went through quite a few processes to become a finished piece. And it's months.
Months.
For various reasons, it's months.
So what element does improvisation play in any of your work with this sort of obsessive, in a very positive way, and type A thing, but also improvisation? Is there an element of improvisation, or is everything so worked out to the...
No, you're right. I'm not likely to suddenly change my mind and accept something that didn't go the way I expected and say, I like it that way anyhow. That's not me. And I might throw out a piece and do it over. And I have. But my obsession with getting things done a certain way is that I think, number one, with the complex processes that I've adopted, there's a kind of credibility that the object gains when you look at it, and it's got obvious care and excellence in its creation. And so I think because of the materiality that I've embraced, which is complex because I combine metal and glass and sometimes other materials in the objects, the quality of the way it's made carries a message of its own, and it sort of commands people's attention in a certain way that's different from if I just sort of whipped it out or slopped it together. So that isn't me. I like to do things a certain way.
And how does that, when you do like to do things in a certain way, and how does that, one thing that we haven't done or been able to show in this exhibition is a lot of your commissioned work. You did stuff for the World Trade Towers, you did things for private homes, you name it. What is that like for you as someone that seems to have, or like to have control over it, than having to work with someone that's equally strong-minded or whatever?
You mean like the architect or the designer?
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a little bit of contention there, but I try to define territory and say, I'll do this and I won't do that. And we make an agreement. And
I'll put up a couple of but we don't have the big railings or things like that you have. Is there a give and take? Sometimes do they come up with ideas that you say is, all right, I can do that, or?
I don't, with the clients, usually not. It's mostly with designers and architects who feel like it's their thing that they're trying to define, and they have a vision they're pursuing. And they've articulated it in drawings quite often, or in photography. And then the client comes along and says, well, I want you to put this in the house that you've designed for me. I want it to have this front door. And I've made a front door for a house in Rancho Mirage at one time. And so the people who I made it for had an architect from Seattle. They're from Indiana, I think, at the time, moving to Rancho Mirage. And they hired a Seattle architect, and then they hired I think maybe also a Seattle interior designer. The interior designer didn't really want me to make the front door, but the architects did. So once they got past that, I let them get past that. I didn't weigh in on it. And they said, all right, you're doing the front door. I had to make friends with the interior designer, which was not all that easy, because I don't know why he wasn't, buying what I was hired to do. I mean, he wasn't. I'm not saying that he didn't pay for it and therefore he didn't have any say. I'm saying that in his mind, it was his territory and it was being encroached on. So that was I had to be aware of that and sensitive to it, and still be myself in the piece. And recently, new owners had that house. To my surprise, I got a call saying they bought this house. And they found out that I made the front door, and they were thrilled because they just, in the process of inheriting their parents, he's inheriting his parents' giant collection of glass in Florida. So now he has this house in Rancho Mirage. And I connected him with an amazing auto body guy that I knew from Costa Mesa, who went and redid the paint job on the exterior, which had been windblown. I don't know if you've ever been down the desert, but some days, like when we were putting in that door, it was 116 or something. If you left the tool on the ground and the sun came over the top of the building, in a couple minutes you couldn't touch it. You had to kick it into the shade, and then wait, or pick it up with a rag and stick it in a bucket. So anyway, the paint job on the door. It's a 16-foot high door. It has a hydraulic operator, and it's a serious door. But I don't know. The guy did a really super job on the paint job. They're happy. It's in. It's all restored and looking good and working perfectly.
So I think we have to wrap it up before we hand it over to the audience for questions. But I just want to ask one more question. Now that you've seen sort of a career, your 50 years of work in 2 galleries, what do you think? I mean, how do you look back on things, and what are you going to do next?
Well, I know what I'm doing next because I've already committed to it. And I have 2 or 3 things that are stacked up that I have to do. They're commissions, I don't know. I gave up glass blowing in my mind. I just don't want to go to the shop, and I can't go to the shop in Seattle as I was. I mean, that situation is gone now for various reasons. And I've given away my equipment to the school down in Tacoma and so on. So I decided it's time for me to focus on the wall. There are a bunch of images that I want to get to, and the pieces that I'm making out of pulled cane, I can make the cane elsewhere and have been, so I can build my palette of color that way. So I feel good about that. I want to make some more things that are images on the wall, like the murals, and they're quasi paintings, And there's something about that cane mural system, and even the vitrolite interests me. I've been thinking that somebody just asked me to make a big vitrolite piece, and I'm going to do it. And so I'm thinking maybe I'll make 2 of them, one that's not already sold, and just have it, So I feel like I'm kind of free to pursue some things that I haven't done for a while.
But looking back on your career, what do you think? I mean, I'm
sometimes I'm
blown away.
No, I walk around and say, what the hell did I make that for? What was I thinking? I was looking at the topiary garden in the lower right-hand corner of that big drawing and didn't remember that I drew a polar bear on an iceberg as one of the topiaries, or the Greek amphora vase there. And there are various things in that drawing details that amused me, and it was almost like I didn't remember what I was thinking at the time. Most things jolt me back to what I was thinking at the time. But in that one, there are elements of it that surprise me. So I'd like to think of myself as somebody that looks at tomorrow more than yesterday.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I'm forced to look at yesterday a lot when I walk around the rooms.